something needed to go. And it wasn't going to be my art practice, and it wasn't going to be being a parent to Benson.
Welcome to Artists and Offices, a podcast that explores, through interviews with working artists, the idea that the work you do for pay supports the work you do for love. I'm your host, Rebecca Bird Grigsby, visual artist, mom of two, and full-time project manager by day. In 2017, I left my day job at the time and spent 2 years rebooting my studio practice while navigating the uncertain terrain between day jobs and creative work. In Season 1, each episode offered a conversation with an artist balancing their day job with their art practice. This season, I'm stepping outside of the office to talk with artists who are also parents, creative people at different stages of their careers and caregiving about what it really takes to make art while raising kids. For the first episode of Season 2, I'm so excited to welcome back Lisa Jonas Taylor to the podcast. Lisa is a Bay Area-based artist who makes paintings that often incorporate sculptural and theatrical elements. Her intuitive process draws on landscape imagery, time, cultural myth, magic, mysticism, and lived experience. She's exhibited at places like Bass and Reiner Gallery, Southern Exposure, the Contemporary Jewish Museum, the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, and the Casa Romantica Cultural Center in Southern California. Her collaborative projects include God Sees Everything, part of SF MoMA's Fertile Ground at the Oakland Museum of California, and Solarium, created during a residency at This Will Take Time, and later exhibited at City Limits Gallery in Oakland. Lisa holds an MFA from California College of the Arts and a BFA from CSU Long Beach. Beyond her artistic life, she's also the mom of a toddler, balancing motherhood and her creative practice. Well, Lisa Jonas Taylor, welcome back to Artists and Offices. Thank you so much for agreeing to come back on the podcast. So you are one of the artists that I spoke with in Season 1, obviously, over 6 years ago now. I think you were one of my first interviews that season, so it's coming up on 7 years. And of course, you've since had a kid, hence our conversation today. And more recently, you left your day job after 10 years, which we'll get to both of those very big life changes later. But to start off our conversation, I'm not sure if you remember, but you mentioned at one point, I think it was sort of toward the end of our first interview, I asked everybody that season, would you quit your day job if you could? And I think, it was clear at that point in the conversation, like there's a lot of things that you valued about your day job, this kind of third thing for various reasons. But, you confessed that like sometimes, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, you felt frustrated and maybe even a little delusional that you couldn't just wake up and make broth and work in your studio and go on hikes and drink wine. And that's like practically a direct quote. So of course, you have your kid now to take care of, but how is reality compared to that ideal of life as an artist without a day job? I'm just curious, like, have you made any broth yet?
Thanks for having me back. It was so much fun being on the first season. I'm super excited to be here for the second season. Yeah, a lot has changed. I should have re-listened to my first interview. I make broth all the time. That's not necessarily part of having more time, but maybe more like I want my kid to eat real broth. So I make the time to do that. And I'm glad that I do. We can get to like all the balancing the three things, but my son, Benson, it's like, he's that third thing. It was such a different time when you first interviewed me when I was working at that point, just able to balance more. And I think my role at the time at CCA was, I think I was still like a program manager level position when you had interviewed me. So I like, the type of work I was doing was still like so much, it felt more kind of like boots on the ground applicable to like who I was as an artist. And since then, I, for quite some time was at the director level at CCA, and being able to be a decision maker definitely had some things that felt valuable. Like, how can I use this to support my community? But it was in a lot of ways, it felt more disconnected from who I wanted to be as an artist and the type of role I wanted to have in my community. Yeah, I couldn't do that authentically through that role for institutional priorities versus, the types of projects I wish I could have done, that kind of thing. It wasn't good or bad, that happens everywhere. Even before having Benson kind of started shifting, like, who am I in this community? Who am I as an artist? Is the work I'm doing still fitting with like who I want to be. And saying that, it's like not to say that it has to be that way. Like I know a lot of people, artists like to say that everything I do is art. And I think having a kid has like in some ways made me realize how you can compartmentalize and almost like need to compartmentalize where the work happens, maybe where the work doesn't happen. Like I had shifted before having Benson being like, yeah, if I could quit my day job, I would in a heartbeat. And obviously who doesn't want to like go in the woods and drink wine and make broth every day?
Yeah, totally.
In addition to going into their studio, maybe like has become a lot less romanticized now. It became essential, essentially. Like, do I want to make work or not? Like, do I want this to be part of my life or not?
Totally. Yeah. And we will obviously dive into all of that a little bit more later, but backing up just a little bit, revisiting your bio for anyone who hasn't gone back and re-listened to our season 1 chat yet. And obviously I will include links and all that good stuff in the show notes. But so you were born in Folsom, which for, anyone who isn't like super familiar with California geography is outside Sacramento, kind of on the way to Tahoe. Is that right?
Yeah,
more or less.
It's the beginning of the foothills. It's the beginning of gold country.
Right. And you did your undergraduate work in art and music in Southern California. I think we talked a bit about that in the first season. And then you came north, of course, to San Francisco to attend California College of the Arts, or CCA, for your MFA. And obviously, we've already touched on, like, you've gone through so much change since our first interview. But let's pause on job and kid and talk a little bit about your decision to leave the city and move north to Santa Rosa with your husband. Can you talk a little bit more about like when and why you made that move?
Yeah, so we made that move, I think about 3 years ago, and it was really around jobs. So my husband had graduated law school recently before that, and where he was hired was in Ukiah, which is Mendocino County's center, which is very far north. And at the time, I was still working at CCA, and it wasn't like 100% post-pandemic, but it was like post like lockdown pandemic. Mm-hmm. So we were very much still kind of like working from home. There's a lot of flexibility. And so we picked Santa Rosa because it was like the exact midpoint between San Francisco and Ukiah. We had always thought about moving north. I don't know if we had always envisioned us as far north as Santa Rosa, but that's where we ended up. And it's, my husband no longer works daily in Ukiah. He works mostly in Sonoma County now. And I no longer have to drive to San Francisco for work, but we liked it. We ended up buying a house here. It's beautiful up here. There's wonderful places to, just go to the woods and drink wine.
Get those hikes in.
Yeah, get those hikes in. I mean, it's been, I feel like I'm still building my community up here. I think that's been like the most challenging thing, moving up here, and it's still kind of being the pandemic, essentially being like tied to my email 8 hours out of the day. Mm-hmm. Made it challenging to like really kind of like get out and kind of meet other artists and kind of figure out the community up here. I feel like I'm still slowly doing that. But from what I found, there's a really lovely community up here with unusual things happening, like things that I don't think could happen the way that they do here in San Francisco or in Oakland. There's too much noise. Yeah, that's kind of like when and why we made the move. It was just very practical.
And then, so your son Benson was born in April 2023 after you moved up there, right? Yeah. And of all the artists I'm speaking with for season 2, I'm pretty sure your kid is the youngest. And so you're still very much kind of in like the trenches of toddlerhood, right?
Yes, I very much am.
Yeah. And you have this lovely post, I think one of your more recent posts on your Instagram page about a painting that you recently finished after 3 years called Spring Moon Rising. And you kind of touch on all that's happened and changed in those 3 years since you first started the painting. You moving to Santa Rosa. I think you lived in a different neighborhood initially before you moved into your house. You bought your house, being pregnant with Benson, moving into the old house, having Benson. And then finally, this spring finishing the painting, and you write, and I'm quoting, it's taken 3 years to realize how to finish this painting. And I've talked a a lot with other parent artists over the course of this season so far about like plugging away or sort of chipping away. These are some of the phrases that people use at work like this. And so I'm wondering, can you talk about, and this is like a really big question, but especially from someone who is very much still in the thick of it, in the thick of like that little person that you have to kind of, when they're with you, you have to kind of keep an eye on them. And can you talk about how having Benson has impacted your work as an artist? And, and then, was spending 3 years on a painting typical for you before becoming a parent? Or did you work more quickly than that?
Yeah, I used to, in a way, yes, in a way, no. I mean, thinking about this, like, knowing we were having this conversation today, like how the way I work has changed, like it never would have taken me 3 years to finish a painting. I guess the actual like physical act of like, I'm going to make a painting and here's the surface and I'm going to start making that painting now. Like never before had it taken me that long to make one. My practice has always been really slow though. I'm not someone who like sits down and like churns out work in a body. My work kind of like has always kind of meandered to find itself. It kind of finds itself through associations within the studio, within what I'm bringing to the studio. Individual pieces in kind of my history of making have often been made fairly quickly. Like my paintings, they're not like super laborious paintings. They're slow to be realized. And I think what's changed is when I get into the studio now, I don't have the same time to really like, or I have to make a decision. I should change that. My practice is still slow and always will be. But I have to make a decision when I have time to work. How am I going to spend this hour, this half hour sometimes, these 2 hours if I'm lucky? Like, is this going to be just me like rearranging for half an hour and then maybe like a seed of something gets planted and I take that with me and like in a couple of days when I get my next half hour. So like in some ways it's become like a lot slower, but then in other ways when I am there, like, and I've made my decision, like, okay, I need to get down to it. Like I find myself making decisions when the time is right and when I need to get stuff done much more quickly. I don't know that I can really say what it's doing to my work yet, but yeah, it's, that painting took 3 years. It was a painting that I kind of, when I started it, I think I knew it. I kind of knew where I was going with it. I kind of knew the moves I wanted to make with it. And it started with just, like practically I wasn't getting in there very often. So it was slowly coming together. And then I got to that kind of point in my practice where I just need to kind of let other things come in and kind of, I needed something to react to. I needed to kind of figure out like, it sat in my studio for a long time. I mean, it could have been done if I said it was done, but I knew it wasn't done. Mm-hmm. And it took a long time to realize like what it needed to be resolved. And I think that comes from just, how time has changed and how I can enter into that space. And it's different. It's the same. It's shifted. It's that kind of like chipping away. I can kind of relate to with my like, I recently had some commissions, and I will say that the needing to make decisions in my studio and decide how I need to use my time if I am on a deadline in some ways, being a toddler parent has helped me because I don't dwell on anything. I'm like, okay, no, I need to like, I know what I need to do. I need to get in here and I need to make this painting. Yeah. So that in some ways that's allowed me to be a little bit more productive.
Yeah. That's something that's come up a lot too, is like, you don't really have the luxury, I guess, or like it's just not really an option to spend a lot of time kind of mulling over certain aspects of it. But then I also wonder if you've experienced this yet, and I'm sure you will, where even if like over those 3 years you only spent, you could probably like break down the time you spent. It's that time in between. I feel like like even this podcast, like the fact that I didn't get around to season 2 for 6, 7 years, which was not my intention. But it allowed me to talk to people like you and one other person that I talked to. I mean, in that time, 4 people that I talked to in season 1 had kids. And if I'd done season 2 right away, I wouldn't have talked to those people. So like sometimes I think I think the older my kids get, the farther along I get, the more I think about the time that things are just sort of percolating, or the opportunities in going back much later to something maybe, or like when so I guess maybe that's a bit of a silver lining.
Yeah. I mean, that painting you're referencing would be a totally different painting if it hadn't taken me so long, or if I didn't have, that space in between. I would have made decisions differently. I would have, things that kind of like entered into the studio wouldn't have, because I didn't experience them before I got to that point in the painting, or trying to resolve something, or would have been very, very different.
And I'm also like really enjoying, you don't post a whole lot on Instagram, but your last few posts have been really lovely, like really thoughtful. And you do, talk about your experiences, being a mother now, and it's just like this lovely image of Benson, like arranging the roses on like a little stump. And so I'm wondering how you've navigated that, like being very open about, your experience as a parent artist, and acknowledging all of these changes that you've gone through. I mean, obviously some people are like really, really private and they keep their family life totally separate. And then some people it's just like pictures of their kids constantly. And so, I'm always very interested in seeing how different people in general, but different artists kind of navigate that. And it's something that in my maybe 20 years of, I guess maybe over the history of social media so far, right? Like I feel like it's shifted. I think people were much more separate, and that compartmentalization was like part of it was sort of like the public facing, this is me as an artist. And there were artists that I didn't even know had kids until their kids were like 10, So I don't know. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of where I'm at with having Benson and who I am as an artist, especially after leaving my job, like I feel like I want to be in a place where I'm just more open and revealing about the work. And, I've always kind of had, it's always bristled me, like just, how we're supposed to kind of like talk about work as an artist, like what we learned in grad school. Like, this is how you write a statement. Mm-hmm. This is how you talk about your work. I've always had a resistance to that. And now I'm sort of like completely disillusioned to it. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for what I do. And I'm just finding I'm in a place where like, I feel like I want to be more open and honest about where my work comes from and talk about it in that way, and not, sort of this other way that we're kind of like supposed to talk about work. Mm-hmm. And I also think it's, for whatever reason, I think there's been certain, expectations around like who artists can be, who they should be, how they should prioritize their practice with family, or I think especially as women artists, there's been very historically, a lot of expectations around, at one point it's like, if you become a mother, like you're done, you're not an artist anymore. Exactly. Like, and I don't find that as the case at all in the communities I'm part of.
Totally. Yeah.
But I think some people still feel that. And I mean, in grad school, I still kind of like felt that mentality a little bit from, at least from like faculty who, came from a different generation, and, also different like parts of the world too, where like, I think historically you felt that more in New York than you have ever in California kind of thing. There's just always been like a very different kind of expectation around artists and life and stuff. But whether you're a parent or not, being more honest about like where work comes from and how do we all find time to do this? Because I can maybe count like 1 or 2 people I've like ever known who like actually have the luxury to like paint and go hiking and drink wine and make broth, and that's all they do. Like everyone has other things to negotiate. And is it good to just like be in the studio like all the time? Right, and like, totally. Is that like, should that be anybody's priority for all of their time. Like we all need to negotiate that. Yeah, just wanting to be more open about that. Like, and
Yeah.
like, yeah, sometimes it takes 3 years to finish a painting.
Well, so thinking back to, your art training and work in the arts, because I agree. I feel like when even as things were shifting, I think just generationally, the vibe when I went to school was, I felt very much the same way, that like, if, having a family, like deciding to have a family was going to just dramatically change things. And I didn't feel like there were a whole lot of examples. And again, this is 20 years ago. So I do think things have shifted. I think they were shifting at that time. But so were there any examples that were helpful to you, or of like parents kind of juggling paid work and a creative practice, or even was that at all part of like professional practices or any of that sort of thing that you did?
Yeah, it definitely was not part of professional practices. Like balancing a family was not. I took the professional practices class that was available at
Yeah, and to
UCA.
to be fair, like it's probably not part of really any like graduate program.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, there were definitely helpful parts of that class, like how to do your taxes and like
Oh, that's good.
all
That's
of,
good to hear. Yeah.
yeah, all of that. And there's some very non-helpful parts where like we dwelled on our artist statements for like 3 weeks. And it's like, well, this is not how I talk about my work, but there's nothing about like, yeah, family. But I did have an advisor who had a family, and his wife also taught at CCA, and I wouldn't say like that was like topic a topic of conversation we talked about a lot when he was in my studio, but it came up maybe more like when I'd run into him after I graduated, and it wasn't so much like discussion of like, what is it like to like have a family and like balance your work and like all of that. But there's just like little tidbits of things that he would say, like whenever we would catch up. And at the time, I actually don't think I've run into him since I became a parent, or like wasn't a part of our active conversation, but he would talk a lot about that like idea of time in the studio and where the work happens, and it being like okay to find half an hour here, okay to find 2 hours there. He would talk a lot about a thing that it's like it's always there. If you're not there, it's still there. And if you need to step away, it's still there. And there's never a point at which you can never come back to it. I think that thing of just like giving yourself permission and not having like that pressure was like always really lovely to hear. And especially like back when I was balancing like my day job and getting to the studio and all of that. And like, I think back on a lot of that now and like how that applies to being a parent. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the like the clearest maybe like kind of example that I had coming out of like the grad school experience, where it felt like it was like kind of more of like a positive kind of thing around like having a family and being an artist. And other than that, it really didn't come up. And sometimes there's that kind of like that still that kind of like lingering like from, prior generations, just, like
We don't
become a
talk about
parent.
it.
Yeah. Or we just don't talk about it. Or like,
Yeah.
yeah, like we're here to talk about your work. I will say there's a lot of artists though that I know now that, not so much like faculty from grad school, but like just peer artists now that I'm either close with or just, follow on Instagram, who are parents and who are very sort of like transparent about being parents and about the experience of like both positive and negative of like how that's like helped and hindered their practice. And I found that like really kind of like great and inspiring to like know these people are out there, whether like I know them personally or not. Like there are other people doing this and figuring it out and like being okay with it. And many of them have really wonderful careers as artists and really wonderful relationships with their families. And a lot of them really have, at least from what I see, like great ways of balancing that. And so that's been, really wonderful to kind of just have this like kind of network or community of just kind of seeing this as an example.
Yeah. Okay. So talking about work now, finally, as I mentioned earlier, you worked at CCA for about a little over 10 years or just about 10 years after grad
About
school.
10 years. Yeah. Like I think
Yeah.
like 10 years and a couple of months or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. And in a few different, and we've already talked about kind of like increasing, like, I don't know if you would say increasingly demanding, but sort of evolving roles, right? Like first special projects and events in the president's office. That's how we met. And then, yeah, I think when we talked last time, you were alumni and parent engagement manager. So kind of at the program manager level. And then most recently as director of alumni engagement. So your last day was in early June and you wrote, again, I'm going to quote you from Instagram because your last few posts have been just like so poetic, but I love what you write. You say, I'm grateful for these 10 years that in some ways felt like I never had to leave art school. It's so great. So can you talk about the decision? And you've touched on this a little bit already, but about the decision to quit your day job after a decade and how the transition is going. It's just been, a couple months.
Well, I mean, like the decision really came out of realizing that there were too many things competing for my time and something needed to go. And it wasn't going to be my art practice. And it wasn't going to be being a parent to Benson. And it wasn't going to be like everything else that I needed to do to maintain my life and the health of my family. I think just becoming a parent, what nobody really prepares you for is all of the other things that you have to do and think about that are not just the direct physical caring for the child
Yeah.
things.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a knock on my husband at all, but most of that fell to me. There's a reason I was a project manager and he was not. It was so much. And, even when I'd have time to get to the studio, there was this like level of exhaustion that was just like different than just being tired from working and being with a kid. It was just like there was no space left for like, what am I bringing to the studio right now? Like, and a lot of my work happens not in the studio. It comes from just me, what I'm observing, what I'm experiencing. And there was just no space. And so it was just, I was, really not feeling good about, that. And also just the moving to a new place and having, when you're working full time and you're remotely for a company so far away, like I felt like there's like this hindrance to like actually being up here. I mean, an easy answer could be like, we'll just find a job in Santa Rosa, but that wouldn't solve for the other thing of like just my time, and where my priorities are. And I will say like, I feel incredibly fortunate that we were in a financial position that I could make those decisions. I know a lot of people just aren't, they just can't. Fortunately, I could. Yeah, I kind of made the decision that was kind of the direction I needed to go in. Not that long after like Benson was born, after coming back from my family leave, it was then just, when are we going to be at the right spot with our family and our life where it's like, okay for me to step away from this. And as soon as time came, I did. It was hard. And I think harder maybe because I had, that was where I went to grad school. And so, I mean, it really did feel like in a lot of ways I never left. One, just like logistically and technically, I never did. But then in another way, like, I run into and stayed in touch with faculty members that maybe I wouldn't have if I, wasn't in that job. And fortunately, in the role I had, I did have times where I got to interact more with the studios or, working with alumni, I got to meet so many incredible artists and designers and architects, people that I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet if it weren't through that role. And so that like just that community and that dialogue. And actually I was having a conversation with one of the deans on like, it was like my last week or second to last week there. And it was just it wasn't about anything we were working on at CCA, but it was just, she had recently gone to a conference on artificial intelligence. And I have some very strong views about AI. But she was sharing some things from the conference that was like the first time that it like had ever made me think of like maybe the opposite of those views. she didn't change my mind, but it was like really interesting because I had like never encountered that in anything I had ever read of like, oh wait, maybe they're okay. I guess I get why people are, like,
Mhm.
um, and I was thinking like, how often am I going to have conversations like this now that I'm like, it's just me in my studio. And like, I mean, obviously it's going to be who do I surround myself with and, who's in my community. But so there's a lot of stuff like that I was really saying, wow, this is like kind of not built into my job, but built into this place. And it's because it's an art and design school that, I've had access to this. And so that was like, I think the hard thing of like, okay, I am letting go of some of this, like that
Mhm.
maybe I would have had to let go of and figure out a long time ago if I hadn't been working there. But then when I was coming closer to my last day, I really felt this like need to like kind of like get back in touch with my grad school roots there. Like, most people leave a job and they've left a job, but like I've left my job at CCA, but CCA is also where I went to grad school. So I'm never really going to like say goodbye to it, but
True.
I
Yeah.
wanted to kind of like reframe like what the institution meant to me and like will continue to mean, like remove myself from these like kind of these professional roles I held and kind of just like connect back to like this was like where I went to school. And it was like the 2 years I was in grad school there were amazing. Like I've met all my best friends in grad school. Like, it was an incredible experience. Like, yeah, so that felt like really important. And I felt like I like took some space to do that. And I, reconnected with some folks who I went to school with who I'm not in as close touch with, which has been like really nice. And then I kind of like haven't looked back. I mean, my life's been a little chaotic. Like I mentioned in that Instagram post you brought up at the beginning of the interview, about, living in this old house now. We're in the middle of a major renovation, which we kind of started a couple of weeks before I left CCA. And so that's been like that's taken up maybe like 80% of like time and
You're the
space.
point person for that.
I'm
It
the
sounds
point
like.
person for, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, we have a really great team through our contractor, but we're not working with like a designer or anything. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we have like a structural engineer and, the things you need, but,
Right. All the things you have
yeah,
to have. Yeah.
it's definitely been like the thing I'm managing right now. It's like kind of
Mhm.
become replaced the job in a lot of ways. But I mean, I don't have a studio right now because that's part of the work. And so making work looks very different for me right now than it would if I did. So this is like very much like the focus. And yeah, so I've had something to kind of like shift energies to. Yeah, I had a lot of time to kind of come to terms with like, okay, this shift in my life. And I felt it'd been so long coming that I like, and I'm so confident it was the right one. And I mean, I'm looking forward to having a studio again and, really realizing like, okay, what does this mean now to like now just have Benson and the studio and like managing my life.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you kind of shifted into a temporary job in a way
Yeah,
of
in a
managing
way.
everything. Yeah. So I was going to ask you what a typical day is like for you right now. So I don't know if you want to talk about that or if you want to imagine what a typical day will be like for you, say this time next year. I mean, and that is really the thing with kids is that that's another thing that's come up a lot. And it's something that I talk about a lot with my day job coworkers who are several of whom have had kids more recently is that, for better or worse, things change. Like this too shall pass. That was the thing I remember when my kids were younger. Like if you're going through a positive phase, enjoy it because it might change. And if you're going through a hard phase, like it just hang in there. That's just like kids are constantly changing, like nothing. And I feel like the last few years for you, and I think going into probably at least the next year are very much along those lines. I'm sure you can really relate to that of like, it's just, you're very much in flux right now. So
Yeah, very much.
yeah.
And I keep like thinking what like Jordan said to me, like the studio will be there. It will all be there when this is, when we've kind of come, when I've gotten to the other side of this. But yeah, I mean, like a typical, and my son's about to start school too. So he's starting preschool in 2 weeks. So yeah, my typical day is about to change quite a bit. Right now, my typical day probably just feels like one long bereave. Like, which I don't is maybe like the best way to describe hanging out with a toddler. We're going outside a lot. We're not drinking any wine. But yeah, I mean, it's been, I wish could get into the studio in the way that I would like to right now, because there's a lot of like, I feel like, having a toddler is, there's a lot that comes from hanging out with him. Like a lot of just, like being around him is creative. The things he does and sees and notices and places we end up going, that I wish I could kind of bring some of this more directly into my work right now. When he's sleeping, essentially, is when I'm working, which is, managing this big project at the house. At some point, I imagine the time he's in school, the time that he's sleeping, start to be able to shift that to finding that schedule of when I can get into the studio, making decisions on how I want to use that time. Obviously, some of that time is going to be just managing our life. Like we need food, we need, we need appropriate clothing for the next season. We need, there's a lot just,
managing the household. Yeah.
Managing the household. But yeah, it's the amount, I can see where that time is going to be. And I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, it is funny that the last time we talked, you were kind of in between spaces, and you had sort of taken over your living room temporarily. And so once again, now, you're working without.
I'm in my living room.
Yeah, you're working without a dedicated studio space while you renovate your house. But as you've mentioned, part of that plan is to convert the garage into a proper studio. So yeah, I'm just curious, you've touched on kind of where you are in that transition. But if there's anything more you want to say about how you're working temporarily, like when you do kind of think about your studio work, not necessarily even working on paintings, but just everything that goes into your creative practice. And then, describe your new space. What do you have planned?
Yeah. So it's our 2-car garage in our house that we're converting to a studio. So when we first moved in, it was a garage I was making work in. I still had like a good portion of it was mine to make work in, but we don't have like a laundry room in our house. So the laundry's out there, all of the yard maintenance tools, that kind of thing. My husband's golf stuff, clubs, whatever they're called, are out there. We've never parked cars in there. Like that was like always, Elliot knew when he married me, like, that's
I feel the same way about garages. It took me, oh my gosh, took me 12, 13 years. But then I finally convinced, I don't use my garage as a studio, but we use it for other things. But I was just like, it's just precious real estate. It's cars. Yeah. The cars can go outside.
Yeah. So, so we're really emptying a lot of that stuff out. Right now it's an unfinished garage space. It's an older house. So it's not, I think a lot of newer builds they're like at least insulating and drywalling garages now is more of a standard practice. But I mean, it was inhospitable to work in the summer. It was so hot.
Yeah.
I'd have to wait for it to get dark, open up the door, air it out a bit. And then I could maybe stomach going out there and doing a little bit. And then in the winter, at least I could put on a bunch of clothes and plug in a space heater. We're emptying out the non-studio things, finding other places that we can put those. That makes sense. The laundry will still be there, but we're kind of building out how we essentially how I'll have a wall of art storage that the back wall will kind of separate sort of the household things that have to remain in there into a small separate space when you first walk out. So you'll kind of be
nice,
a little alleyway of house stuff. And then you enter the main part of the garage, which will be 100% studio stuff, insulating everything, fully drywalled, painted, proper lighting throughout, functional windows, probably add an AC into one of those windows since it gets pretty hot up here. That way I can work in the summer. We're going to put a loft over part of the garage with a functioning kind of ladder situation thing. So I can get a lot of stuff up off the floor. And sort of this divider wall thing to separate laundry, household stuff could also be help me get a like a partial fourth wall to kind of like paint on,
Yeah, totally.
kind of thing. So it's going to be really great. I'm super excited for it, just to have like a nice conditioned space that's like mostly dedicated
Yeah. And
to
it sounds
making
like
art.
decent size as well if it's a 2-car garage. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 2 car. It'll be a really nice size.
Nice.
So, and I mean, I do tend to work large.
Yeah.
So that will be good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, your
Yeah.
space definitely. I think this is what I found anyway, is that there are lots of artists that find creative ways around this, but I do think that your dedicated studio space does kind of dictate the scale at which you
Yeah.
work.
Right. Right
Yeah,
now I'm
to
working
some
very
extent.
small.
Yeah.
It's like I'm finding little things. It's like I have to be making something. So it's like I'm finding time here and there and space here and there to work on drawings, work on some other, weird little things I don't even know what to describe them as. Benson and I make a lot of stuff together, but it like all has to be cleaned up and put away. So,
Yeah,
that's a thing. Like it's having a dedicated space, just being able to leave things out. Like,
totally. Yeah.
so it's like when I have half an hour here, half an hour there, it's like sometimes most of that time is spent getting everything out and then putting it all
Yeah,
away.
yeah, and that's kind of like on a very practical level what you mentioned before, that that your, was it advisor, you said, Jordan, had
Yeah.
mentioned that like it's always going to be there. It'll be there for you, and I think that's so helpful as a parent, or really just anytime that you, as an artist, you have something taking up a lot of your time, whether it's your job or caregiving or something else going on in your life, like to know to be able to have that kind of long view and to be at peace with like, I'm not getting to my work as much as I want now, but it'll be there. You like, and especially right now, you're in such a state of flux. Like, but to your point, I think what really helps take advantage of those little chunks of time when you do have them is, to your point, like being able to just get right into it and get going and not have really minimize the time that you're spending on setup and cleanup and transitions, and just like, you've got 30 minutes, you go in there, you can take advantage of those 30 minutes.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
like essential right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked last time because you were working in your home, and I think you were in between studio spaces outside of your home at that time. So kind of like the convenience of working out of your home compared to, some of the potential benefits of like a rented or like a shared studio, being part of a community of artists. Maybe there's like shared facilities that you have access to. So I'm curious, like, how do you feel about that trade-off? Obviously, you're going to have sort of an in-home, very close to home studio. How do you feel about that trade-off now that you're a parent?
I really embrace the home studio now as a parent, just because sometimes you are just finding half an hour here, 20 minutes there. It's like, it has to be right here. Like, one, I wouldn't have the time to go anywhere. And two, like if Benson's napping, I can't leave.
Right.
So like has to be right here. I will say too, moving up north, that's one of the, like a cultural shift I've felt in kind of like the art communities. There really aren't a lot of like commercial industrial spaces up here that artists are like sharing. It's not that they don't exist. There definitely are a couple, but there are like a couple. Whereas
Not
in
as
like,
many.
yeah, in Oakland and San Francisco, it's like there are so many places to go in artist communities to rent a studio, or to industrial spaces or commercial spaces to rent a studio. That really doesn't exist the way it does there. Up here, I would say 9 out of 10 artists that I have met up here all have some kind of shed or garage or like room in their house. That's their studio. That's kind of like the norm up here. Like that's just where
Mm-hmm.
people have space. With only a couple of these sort of like more commercial artist communities, there's just practically, not the space to have that kind of thing. So I think also too, it's different. I think having a home studio, it like when I was working on my living room in San Francisco when we last spoke, there's almost this feeling of like feeling left out of one of those communities, or like feeling just kind of like not great about like how my practice is professionally presented like that, where knowing what it could be kind of thing, or kind of the expectation. Whereas up here, I mean, people have more space up here too. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's most people have the space to like have a shed or a garage or
Right,
a shipping
right.
container, or, like, Santa Rosa is like a more urban place up here than everywhere else, but it's still like everywhere has right to farm up here. Like it's still like very rural.
Yeah, yeah, I would imagine compared to
So
San Francisco. Yeah, yeah.
even the like Santa Rosa being like the more urban place is like, oh, the whole thing's a suburb. Like it's not a city in the same way as other parts of the Bay. Yeah. So it's just people use space up here and differently. And they think about kind of like that relationship of like studio practice and where it's physically located, I think a little differently. So there's different expectations. And yeah, I would make way less work if I had to find the time in my day to go somewhere else to make my work if it wasn't like right here.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I would also imagine, obviously, if you're renting a studio, that's an extra expense.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another thing to consider. So in addition to, your art practice and hanging out with Benson, I think one of the things you mentioned wanting to spend more time on, and this is a good segue, is after leaving CCA, is getting more immersed in your local creative community. And you touched on this already, but can you talk a little bit more about like, what does that look like for you now? And like, how do you kind of hope that, envision that will evolve over time as you complete work on your studio? Benson goes to preschool, eventually big kid school. I'm just curious, like, what are some of the unique things that are happening there that you would want to get more involved in?
Yeah. There's a lot of like I mentioned, a lot of people have like their studio in their garage, their studio in their shed, their studio, like there's a lot of like, I feel like artists up here are the community. They're really taking a lot of opportunity to build the opportunity that they want up here. So there's less like maybe traditional looking kind of gallery spaces and a lot more artist run project spaces, but in a really, really exciting and generative way. Like people get really excited about them too. Like there's a place actually not too far from here, kind of in the next neighborhood over called Le Shed that two really lovely people started running. I can walk to it. So far, they have had some like really incredible artists come and really do really exciting work. And people are just, they have an idea and they make it happen. I feel when we first moved up here, I feel like I had a lot of time to kind of start like, trying to like go to some of these things and meet these people and, see what's going on and how can I be a part of it. And what can I bring to this community? And then I had Benson and I feel like I kind of disappeared for a while. And now I feel like I'm like, have this like energy and time to kind of pick back up and be like, okay, wait, no, there's really incredible stuff happening up here. Like I want to get to know what's happening and, who's doing it and how can I support it? And so I've met a couple really lovely people who have introduced me to other things going on. And it's like lovely, weird stuff. Like I'm super excited about a lot of stuff happening up here. And, like I said, like I want to figure out how can I be more supportive and more a part of the community. I have some ideas of what that might look like, but I don't want to like jump the gun on like any ideas that I'm not like really ready to.
Totally.
But yeah, I'm excited to have like the mental space to like think about that. And also just like the time to like, not be so drained of like, oh, there is this like really great thing happening on Saturday. And like, I think I can like drag myself out to go and do that and meet those people and like see what they're making. And whereas before that felt really, really hard.
Yeah. Very taxing on top of everything else, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it's like, being so new up here and really not knowing anyone. It's like, it's not just like, oh, okay, I'll go to the thing. It's like, no, okay, I have to go to the thing and I'm not going to know anybody. Yeah. And like, I really have to like, I can be like a little shy in those situations and easily find an excuse not to. So the less excuses I have and like the more time I have to like build myself up to like go to one of these things is like, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you have to kind of force yourself initially, but it will just build, like you'll just continue to build off of that. And also I think your time will, you've been at like the sort of max, like deficit, and then you'll just continue to kind of, claw back more time. I think you'll see, as Benson gets older and as your house work is finished and you have your studio and all of that. So that's exciting. Final question. So in 2022, you were co-chair for the Oakland Campus Legacy Committee, and you gave the closing remarks at the end of the Rooted ceremony on the Oakland campus. And you said, and again, I'm so sorry, I have to quote you again. Each of you are here because this place has had an impact on you, made an impression in your life, your studio, your classroom, and you have had an impact on this place, on our history and legacy, and on this community that will endure as we move across the Bay. And like, I just, I can't help but read those words now and obviously think of you, like leaving the place where you went to school, where you worked for 10 years, moving across, not the Bay, but across the Golden Gate and going through all these changes the last few years. So I guess we've spent a lot of time reflecting on this incredible foundation that you've built for yourself in SF, and now that you're kind of embarking on in the North Bay. So, what are you, aside from creative community there, like what are you looking forward to, or like what are you working toward in terms of your art making and what's next for you?
I mean, right. That's a hard thing to answer right now. Like I don't like right now it's like just making more. Like I want to make more. Like I feel like I've gone through a period of my life where I'm not making as much as I want to be. And I like need that in my life. And so it's hard to like define a lot of goals beyond that, but I'm looking forward to having the space and having the time to get in there and make the work, which has just felt like such a negotiation before. And I'm looking forward to maybe getting something back of that slow practice that I had, that I feel like I haven't been able to work that way in a long time. And part of that's like just the nature of some of the stuff I've recently done has been like more kind of like project and commission based. And so it's like, it feels more like an assignment to do. Mm-hmm. And we've moved so much, and then, big life changes. So right now it's not like it's not a defined goal. And maybe that's a really good thing. I don't know though, that should be.
Well, I think that's a pretty good fitting note to end on. But Lisa, I'm so grateful for you coming back on. And I'm really just genuinely so excited for you and this chapter that you're embarking on, and can't wait to see what you do over the next year and beyond. So yeah, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great. It's great to, I'm glad to have this opportunity to like, just really like talk through some of this stuff. And I hope it's helpful.
Artisan Offices is produced and edited by me, Rebecca Bird Grigsby. Intro music is provided by Jesse Kelsey. Show notes and additional episodes can be found at artisanoffices.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast on your streaming platform of choice and leave the show a rating or review. This will help the podcast connect with even more Artisan Offices. Thank you so much for listening.
All kinds of things were happening in there, like around these sculptures. Yeah. And at one point I wasn't in there, but I like heard something fell.
Oh no.
Like fall down, but everything was fine. The sculptures were pretty durable, I guess.
That's funny. I feel like that's a good metaphor for life as a parent artist. Like, it's probably fine.